Imagine walking into a bar just to relax after a long day and witnessing something no one would ever forget. That night, everything seemed normal. The sound of clinking glasses, lively conversations, and soft music playing in the background. But then, a bully decided to humiliate the wrong person. Greg, an arrogant man used to intimidating others, found his perfect victim. What he didn't know was that on that same night, another man was sitting in the back of the bar, silently watching everything unfold. That man was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And what happened next was something no one in that bar would ever forget. What do you think happened when The Rock decided to step in? How did Greg react when he realized he had met someone who wouldn't back down? And most importantly, how did this story end? Stay until the end to find out. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like to support the channel. Comment below what you would do in this situation. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Now sit back and get ready for a story full of tension, twists, and a powerful lesson about respect. The night was warm, and the city streets were bustling. The sound of car horns blended with the murmur of people walking along the sidewalks, illuminated by streetlights casting a yellowish glow over the asphalt. It was one of those nights where everything seemed alive. Groups of friends laughed loudly as they passed by restaurants, couples walked hand in hand, and exhausted workers made their way home after a long day. Among the various establishments lining the street, there was a rustic-looking bar that stood out. Its dark wooden facade and dim lighting created a cozy atmosphere, a refuge for those seeking a moment of rest. The neon sign flickered from time to time, as if it had witnessed years of stories passing through its doors. Outside, a small group of men spoke in hushed tones, while the door swung gently each time someone entered or left. Inside, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the city's lively movement. The scent of aged wood mixed with the strong aroma of beer and spirits, creating a nostalgic sensation. The walls were decorated with old photographs of customers and collector's items, from vintage road signs to autographed baseball jerseys. The lighting was low, casting long shadows over the tables and setting a warm, intimate mood. The bar was busy, but not overcrowded. The muffled sound of animated conversations filled the space, interspersed with the clinking of glasses and the crack of billiard balls colliding. In the corner of the room, a jukebox played a soft country tune, blending seamlessly into the ambiance without being too noticeable. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a graying beard and sharp eyes, moved skillfully behind the counter. His motions were quick and practiced, serving drinks and taking orders as if he had been doing it for decades. His gaze was keen, scanning every corner of the bar without needing to turn his head, always alert for anything out of the ordinary. At the back of the bar, sitting on one of the tall stools near the counter, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson held a glass of whiskey between his fingers. His presence was imposing, even though he wasn't doing anything to draw attention. He wore a black jacket over a simple t-shirt, his muscles evident beneath the fabric. His eyes fixed on the amber liquid in the glass as he slowly swirled his drink, unhurried, as if savoring every second of that peaceful moment. He took a deep breath, inhaling the distinctive scent of the place. He liked places like this. Simple, unpretentious spots where he could just be a regular man for a few hours. Places where people were simply living their lives, free from the pressure of cameras, endless commitments, and the constant need to appear invincible. He enjoyed that feeling of anonymity. Here, no one was looking at him, expecting a performance. No fans asking for a photo. No business people talking about contracts. No trainers demanding another workout session. Just him and his whiskey. Yet even without trying, he still attracted attention. It wasn't just his impressive size or the fame that preceded him. It was the way he carried himself. The way his posture radiated confidence without the need for words. The controlled calmness in every movement. The bartender had noticed his presence from the moment he walked in. Like most staff members in bars like this, the man behind the counter had seen it all: troublesome customers, rowdy drunks, bullies who enjoyed imposing themselves on others. But The Rock was none of those things. His presence wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. The kind of person you respect without really knowing why. He took a sip of his whiskey, letting the strong liquid slide smoothly down his throat. This wasn't his first time here. He had stopped by this bar a few times before, always on nights like this, when he just wanted a moment of peace before diving back into his fast-paced routine. However, the tranquility of that night wouldn't last much longer. On the opposite side of the bar, a tall and burly man named Greg laughed loudly, his deep and arrogant voice cutting through the atmosphere like a sharp blade. He spoke in an exaggerated manner, his flamboyant gestures and the way he leaned over the table making it clear that he wanted to be the center of attention. His friends surrounded him, laughing at every comment, but there was something forced in their expressions, as if they were laughing more out of obligation than genuine amusement. Greg was one of those guys who loved asserting dominance over others. His way of speaking was always accompanied by a tone of contempt, as if everyone around him was inferior. Every sentence that left his mouth seemed to be said with the sole intention of being noticed, of making others acknowledge his authority over that space. That night, he had already told the same story for the third time. He spoke of a supposed fight he had in another bar months ago, about how he put a guy in his place with just one punch. His hands moved through the air, reenacting every detail in an exaggerated manner, while he made sure to flex his muscles whenever possible. His friends kept laughing, but some people in the bar were already losing patience. The bartender, drying a glass behind the counter, discreetly sighed. He knew the type all too well. Greg was that customer who always ended up crossing the line. And when that happened, it didn't take long for things to get out of control, and that was when he found a new target. In the corner of the bar, at a small table near the counter, a thin man quietly drank his beer. His name was Eric. Eric didn't seem like someone who enjoyed drawing attention. He wore simple clothes, an old jacket, and a faded cap. His posture was slightly hunched, his body leaning over the table as if he wanted to take up as little space as possible. He stared at his beer glass with a distant look, like someone who just wanted to relax after a hard day. But to Greg, he looked like the perfect victim. The bully narrowed his eyes, a malicious smile forming on his lips. It was always the same. People like him loved finding easy targets, and Eric, sitting there alone, not saying a word, seemed like an easy prey waiting to be exploited. The first provocation came subtly, thrown out casually. Greg made a comment loud enough for Eric to hear, but without looking directly at him. A remark about his appearance, his posture, about how he seemed out of place in that bar. Eric didn't react. He simply remained quiet, ignoring the provocation. But Greg didn't want to be ignored. The second provocation followed shortly after, this time more direct. Greg leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his voice louder, demanding that others in the bar pay attention. He spoke with disdain, mocking Eric as if he were just joking. But everyone there knew exactly what was happening. Greg's smile widened when he realized Eric wasn't responding. The lack of reaction was an invitation to continue. And then came the third provocation. Greg reached out and, without hesitation, pushed Eric's beer glass, causing the liquid to spill across the table. A few drops splashed onto his jacket. The bar fell silent for a moment. The nearby customers started noticing what was happening. Conversations quieted, discreet glances were cast toward the two men, but no one did anything. Eric looked at the spilled beer and took a deep breath. He didn't want trouble. All he wanted was to drink in peace, to finish the night without having to deal with situations like this. He knew Greg wanted to provoke a reaction, wanted him to respond so he could justify what would come next. So he did what he always did. He lowered his head and remained quiet. But at that moment, one man decided that this wasn't going to happen. The Rock saw everything. He despised situations like this. He couldn't stand people who preyed on the weak. From Greg's first comment, he had already recognized exactly the kind of person he was dealing with. He had encountered many like him throughout his life, and he knew exactly how this would end. The whiskey glass in his hand was nearly empty. He swirled the remaining liquid inside, watching the light reflect on the glass. Then, without a word, he placed the glass on the counter and slowly stood up. His movement was silent, but something changed in the bar at that moment. The atmosphere became tense, as if everyone could feel that something was about to happen. He walked with firm steps toward Greg's table, his gaze locked and determined. The bully, too caught up in his own arrogance, only realized the rock's presence when a massive shadow loomed over him. He lifted his eyes slowly and was met with broad shoulders and a serious expression. The entire bar fell silent. Greg's breath wavered for a second, but he quickly tried to regain his composure. He needed to maintain his image. He tried to look confident, to hold on to the air of superiority he always used to intimidate others. But something was different this time. The rock's gaze didn't carry a threat, but it carried a weight that Greg had never felt before. There was something about the way he stood there, simply present, that made Greg feel an overwhelming pressure on his shoulders. It wasn't fear, it was something worse. It was the realization that he had met someone who wouldn't back down. Greg tried to keep his arrogant smile. He said something in a mocking tone, as if trying to downplay the situation. He leaned back in his chair, pretending he wasn't bothered. But no one in the bar laughed. Even his own friends, who had been laughing at his jokes moments before, were now silent. They knew Greg had come across someone who wouldn't fold under his intimidation. The silence that filled the bar was long and heavy. The air felt denser. The rock remained still, firm, without moving. He didn't need to raise his voice. He simply waited. His gaze said everything. Greg felt his throat go dry. The game had changed. For the first time that night, he wasn't sure if he would walk away as the winner. The silence in the bar grew even heavier. Greg looked around and realized that everyone was watching. He no longer had anyone on his side. The entire bar observed the scene with a mix of expectation and tension, waiting to see what would happen next. Greg's friends, who had been laughing loudly and encouraging him moments before, now remained quiet, avoiding eye contact. None of them seemed willing to intervene. This was no longer Greg's territory. For a moment, his confidence wavered. Doubt flashed through his eyes like lightning. But his pride was too big to let him back down. He couldn't just lower his head and walk away like a coward. Not after everything. He felt the weight of everyone's gaze on him, and the fact that he was being challenged in front of so many people made his blood boil. His breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and then he made the worst choice possible. He tried to attack. The move was sudden, impulsive, driven more by desperation than by skill. There was no planning, no control. Greg simply raised his arm and threw a clumsy punch in the rock's direction, as if trying to grab back the authority he had lost. But before the blow even came close, the rock had already moved. With impressive reflexes, he shifted his body slightly to the side, dodging the attack effortlessly. Greg felt nothing but empty air where his punch should have landed, and before he could process what was happening, an overwhelming force caught his wrist mid-air. The rock's hand wrapped around his arm like an iron vice. The grip was firm but not cruel. He wasn't breaking bones, but he also left no room for resistance. The force was precise, calculated, absolute control of the situation. With a swift and precise movement, the rock twisted Greg's arm behind his back. It wasn't a violent move, but the way it was executed left no room for a fight. Greg felt his own weight throw him off balance, his knees buckling for a second. The strength he once used to intimidate others was now working against him. The grip was firm but not cruel. He wasn't breaking bones, but he also left no room for resistance. The force was precise, calculated, absolute control of the situation. With a swift and precise movement, the rock twisted Greg's arm behind his back. It wasn't a violent move, but the way it was executed left no room for a fight. Greg felt his own weight throw him off balance, his knees buckling for a second. The strength he once used to intimidate others was now working against him. He stumbled, his body crashing heavily against the table behind him. The impact was strong enough to knock over glasses and bottles, which rolled and shattered on the floor, spreading shards and liquid across the wooden surface. The entire bar held its breath. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, but no one moved. Everyone was in shock. Greg tried to break free, tried to regain his footing, but the pressure on his arm was still there. The rock didn't release him immediately. He held the position for a few more seconds, keeping Greg in place as if waiting for him to fully grasp what was happening. And then the bully realized the truth. He was completely helpless. Adrenaline still rushed through his body. His mind screamed at him to react, to fight back, but he knew there was nothing he could do. He had lost before he even started. Humiliation burned inside him. Anger and shame mixed together, his face flushing with frustration. He wanted to break free, to regain his dignity, but he knew there was no way out. The Rock leaned in slightly. His face was just inches from Greg's. His expression wasn't one of anger. It was something much worse. It was the look of someone who had nothing to prove. His mere presence was enough to crush any resistance. He said something in a low, firm voice, something only Greg could hear, and then everything became clear to him. The bully blinked a few times, his breathing uneven. His body finally accepted defeat. The tension in the Rock's shoulders eased slightly, and with a gesture of complete control, he let go of Greg's arm. The bully stumbled back slightly, rubbing his sore wrist. But he did nothing more. He knew he had no choice. He lowered his gaze, picked up his jacket from the floor, and without looking at anyone, walked out of the bar with heavy, hurried steps. His friends hesitated for a moment, exchanging glances. But then, one by one, they followed him without saying a word. As soon as the door closed behind them, silence hung in the air. The bar remained quiet for a moment, as if everyone was still processing what had just happened. And then the applause began. At first hesitant, just a few scattered claps, then growing louder, echoing through the room. Some patrons banged their glasses on the tables, others smiled and nodded, as if knowing this was a story they would tell for years to come. The bartender, who had been watching from behind the counter, smiled with satisfaction and grabbed a new bottle. He poured a fresh drink for the Rock and slid it toward him, a silent gesture of respect. The Rock took the glass, gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, and took a sip. To him, this was just another normal night. The bar returned to normal. People resumed their conversations, but with a new story circulating through the crowd. Everyone there knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. Outside, Greg could still taste the bitterness of humiliation. His mind burned with anger, but he knew he would never return to that bar. Inside, the Rock finished his drink and pulled some bills from his pocket. He left them on the counter and began walking toward the door. Before stepping out, he felt someone's gaze on him. Eric was still there. The thin man watched everything with wide eyes, still looking stunned. He wanted to say something. Maybe a thank you. Maybe something more. But the words seemed stuck in his throat. The Rock paused for a brief moment, turned his head and gave a small smile, as if to say there was no need for thanks. Eric understood the message. He simply nodded slowly, a shy smile appearing on his face. And then, the Rock walked out the door, disappearing into the night. That night, a bully learned a lesson. And everyone there realized that true strength doesn't come from muscle size, but from the respect earned through actions. And so that night came to an end. An entire bar watched in silence as a bully learned a lesson he would never forget. Greg, who always used his strength to intimidate others, finally met someone who wouldn't bow to fear. And it didn't take unnecessary violence or harsh words. Just presence, confidence, and the right attitude were enough to show the true difference between power and respect. The Rock didn't walk into that bar looking for a fight, but when he saw an injustice happening, he knew he couldn't just stand by. What does this story teach us? That true strength is not in muscles, but in attitude. That respect was not imposed through fear, but earned. And that sometimes a simple act of courage can change everything. If this story kept you hooked until the end, leave a like to help the channel grow. Comment below what you thought of this ending, and if you've ever witnessed something similar. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.